WNST, it's House of Doldrums, and the Ravens taking the summer off here before training camp. I'm stretching out a little bit, and I have a long list, kind of like Santa, making my little list and checking it twice of all the people I follow and people that I see on the web, and some relevant stuff being written out there about all sorts of stuff. This guy does stadiums, and he does civic money, and he writes books. His book in 2008 was called Field of Schemes. He is a repeat visitor here at WNST.net. His name is Neil DeMoss. He's up in Brooklyn, New York, doing all that. You can follow him at Field of Schemes out on Twitter or Google the book itself. It is spelled, his name is spelled D-E-M-A-U-S-E, and we welcome him back onto the program. And, Neil, I guess in summertime, I like to have authors on. I like to stretch it out because we don't have a Caps game tonight. We don't have a Wizards game tomorrow. We don't have a Ravens game in Pittsburgh on Sunday. And it gives me a chance to talk about some of the greater details of this stuff. I'm a bit of a nerd about this, I mean, I'm pushing 50 years old. I was in my teens when the Colts were ripped out of Baltimore, and they went to Indianapolis over a stadium, the Hoosier Dome. And then, of course, we pined away for 13 years to bring football back. We built a baseball stadium. That is the stadium every other stadium, still a quarter of a century later, was either built after, measured by. But, in the modern era, we're seeing cities, and specifically these cities in California, like we did Montreal a decade ago, just say goodbye. Don't let the door hit you on the backside. I landed in San Diego, and I know you were writing about this and exposing all of this a decade ago, but, it's the worm is starting to turn. The public money's not there for stadiums in most places, right?
Man, I was asked this maybe 15 years ago. I don't even remember what it was. There was a couple of referendums, I think, that had gone down where people were voting down big stadium subsidies, and somebody asked me, is the tide turning? Are we finally starting to see the end of this? And I was like, maybe we are. 2003, I said this, okay? I have learned my lesson not to predict that the tide is turning, just based on what's going on in a few cities. And I think it's certainly, promising, right? I mean, you've got the mayor of Anaheim stood up to the Angels and said, no, we're not going to give you, $300 million worth of development rights for nothing.
And by the way, that place is a dump. Just, FYI, Neil, I did 30 ballparks in 30 days 2 summers ago. My wife's a 2-time leukemia battler, and, we called every team, and I went to a different park every single day for 30 days. I was in the middle of it in June 2 years ago, and that was the one ballpark, even more so than Oakland, which I think the bugs in the bathroom has some charm. I think Tampa and the blimp they play in down there, I could find very little redeeming quality about Anaheim. It really did feel like a really old, abused, beaten down place that was built 50 years ago. And I wondered, how are they going to get this done in California? I literally wondered that out loud and thinking, well, they're probably not. I mean, they're not going to get that money from California.
I mean, the last time I was there was a couple of renovations ago, so I couldn't tell you. But again, if it's worth if fans are going to appreciate a renovation and come out and spend more money and go to more games, and it's worth a couple $100 million to Artie Moreno to do that, great, go and do that, right? But it's not necessarily worth $300 million to Anaheim to do that, which is what Tom Tate, the mayor, determined, right, that they weren't going to get the money back. There's a few other mayors, various different places, right? Mayor of Oakland, mayor of Calgary up there, fighting with the Flames, who are just starting to hold the line and say, okay, sure, we'll consider some kind of public money, but you have to show where we're getting it back.
But we're not building it for you and giving you the turnstile, right? Literally, which is, that's how Peter Angelos got rich. He didn't even have to go fight for it. He just bought the team, and 25 years later, he's got $3 billion, and the city has a 25-year-old stadium, right?
But at the same time, look what else has happened. Nevada is giving $750 million to the Raiders. Arlington, Texas just agreed to build a brand new stadium to replace the old stadium that was only built 20 years ago.
Atlanta's done it twice in the last 6 months, right?
Absolutely. So it's the issue isn't about whether people are, whether it's politicians or the public or whatever, are standing up and saying we don't want to put public money into this, because people have been saying that for 20, 25 years. The problem is that no matter how much that happens, there's just so much money at stake, right? It is such a part of the sports business model at this point to get public subsidies that there's no way the team owners are going to back away from this and just say, oh, well, people don't like it. I guess we'll just pay for this ourselves because, all they have to do is find one city council, one state legislature that one time is going to say, okay, fine, we will vote a majority and give you your money, and suddenly they've got $500 million free.
He is Neil deMause. He is Field of Schemes out on Twitter as well as under his own name, and the book was Field of Schemes a decade ago. You can Google that, buy it out on Amazon, or follow along on Twitter as, this is a full-time beat, dude, right? I mean, like literally the sports business people that follow all the media money and who's going where and who's building what, but you've been on this for the longest time, and I mean, is there any in your mind, what would be your justification for this if you were to say in Nevada, if you were a citizen there, in Nevada, I know what they're going to say. They're going to say Nestor's going to pay for that when he comes to Vegas and sees you two and sees the Raiders and sees the Knights and bets the hard eight and puts his head down on the pillow on the strip somewhere. They're going to get $1 a night or whatever that 0.78 percentage of every night. They are literally charging the tourists for the stadium in Nevada, but they could charge the tourist anyway and turn that money into fire department or education or put it into roads, whatever they want to put it into, but they are putting it into the Oakland Raiders and the occasional U2 concert. I guess the Stones will be dead by then, but hell, we've been saying that about Keith Richards for 20 years. So
yeah, I mean, they love to say, make the if you build it, they will come argument, right? You're not going to get these tourists to come to Las Vegas unless you have the Raiders, right? Which is a patently ridiculous argument that Las Vegas needs the Raiders in order to become a tourist destination. I'm just in the middle of writing a post on my Field of Schemes website about Oakland, the Oakland A's having this report claiming that it's going to be worth $3 billion to the city of Oakland to get a new stadium to move the Raiders. Not the Raiders. Sorry, they move the A's. About half a mile down I-880 from the Coliseum to another site, and that's just completely ridiculous, right? I mean, there's no possible way that much money can flow just from moving a team from one part of the city to another part of the city. But again, if that's the way that you can justify getting money, and the A's aren't even necessarily asking for that much public money, but they are asking for access to land. And there is a whole industry out there of consultants who will say, okay, we'll take a whole bunch of really big numbers and run them through some algorithms and come out with some other really big numbers and say, look, $3 billion.
Yeah, the government does it all the time. They'll just lie to you and make you feel good about it, right?
Yeah, I mean, and it's again, there's a little bit more awareness now that these numbers are not entirely accurate. And there's an awful lot of economic studies out there that have tried to find any evidence that economic spending or tax receipts or income or anything like that goes up when you build a new stadium, and no one has been able to find it in the numbers at all. But again, they're still going to keep arguing this, and if you just throw enough numbers out there, eventually people will say, oh well, it's got to be good for something maybe. But you're asking me what benefit is. Look, there obviously I've been to Oakland Coliseum. I don't think it's that terrible either.
It's awful, but I love it.
No. I'm saying if they tore down Mount Davis, that thing is just hideous and has not, is terrible for baseball. I went to a bunch of games there before they added that for the Raiders, and it was. It wasn't a great baseball stadium.
Well, it reminds me of Memorial Stadium, and I grew up there, so anytime I go there, it's like being in the scene from The Natural or something. Like, I get to go back to my youth. Mine is Mount Davis, I will give you. But the place smells like Memorial Stadium underneath. The seats, the structure, all of it.
It needs some work, right? But regardless of that, if you build a new stadium, it will be nicer than that, right? So there is some benefit to fans, and there is some benefit to, I guess, to Oakland residents who might want to be fans if they, might be going across the bay to see Giants games now because they don't want to go to the Coliseum. So there's something there, and there's definitely some, not $3 billion, but there's some economic benefit to having, a new building. And if a few more people spend their money in Oakland as opposed to in, San Francisco or Berkeley or Richmond or wherever, there is some benefit there. But it's just not of the scale that the teams pretend it is. I always say there is a price point at which it makes sense for a public entity to put some money into a stadium. Just it's more likely to be 10 or 20 or maybe $30 million rather than 100 or 200 or $300 million. Because at that point, there's just no possible way you can get any significant bang for your buck.
Well, the Orioles, lobbied Baltimore in the late 80s with Larry Lucchino and Edward Bennett Williams. We had lost the Colts. We were a little desperate. Governor Schaefer, who was the mayor before that, got Camden Yards built for the baseball side, got the money put aside for football. Clearly, Art Modell came here and took the money. And 22 years later, I can look back and say, well, I think the Ravens were good for Baltimore. I think it was a good decision for Baltimore to lure a National Football League team here. It's done a lot of great things for the community. But I look back at Camden Yards and I see what the Orioles have become, which is this thing that used to draw 3.5 million people and then went off the side of the cliff when Angelos bought it. And I'm writing a book this summer called The Peter Principles, and I'm releasing that out online. I'm 6 chapters out, and I really have to look back over a quarter of a century of doing sports radio, which I've been doing since 1992 here. I remember walking in there the first year and thinking, how much has the city benefited from Camden Yards versus how much the owner has benefited? Peter Angelos' heirs are going to wind up walking out of this deal with about $3 billion off of a $29 million down payment on a franchise. And, I wonder, and the city's still broke, and the city's still upside down, and the city's still a mess. And obviously the Orioles were a big part of that 2 years ago after the riots in playing a game where they said to the fans, we don't even want you to come. We don't need you here today. We're going to lock the gates, and we're going to play baseball while tanks circle the city. So, wherever the ethics are and where the integrity is, all of that that's a different argument. It's where the money is, and the money really, as you've pointed out forever, the money goes to the owner of the team. That's how it works. I mean, and it works that way with Steve Bisciotti when he sells the Ravens for $1.7 billion or whatever it's going to be in the end, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, as kids or whatever. And, the city was on the hook for the $500 million it took to build the stadium, right?
Yeah, no, and that's not just, Angelos who does that, right? I mean, that's the model now.
That was Bud Selig's model in Milwaukee all the way around, right?
It used to be in the 60s and 70s, you would have public entities putting up the money for stadiums, but then they would get it back, right? The teams would actually pay rent, or they would give a share of parking revenues or ad revenues or concessions revenues or something like that. As late as 82, the Minneapolis Metrodome was built, entirely public money, right? But it was a fairly low cost. I think it was under $100 million. And the Minneapolis actually wound up turning a profit on that because the Twins and the Vikings were paying rent, and paying a cut of their revenue.
And they also had Super Bowls and Rolling Stones concerts and tractor pulls and all the other things that go with it, right?
Absolutely, but the difference is that the teams were actually putting up some revenue, right? Everybody always talks about
the team had skin in the game instead of here it's mine, it's free, you're going to pay for it, and we're going to make all the money off.
Right. So and that's the thing. Everybody always talks about the headline number of who's putting up the money up front, and that's important. But who's getting the money on the back end is equally important. And the Orioles really were pioneers in terms of not just, with Camden Yards, not just you're going to pay for this, but you're going to pay for this, and we are going to keep all the proceeds. And that really is the model, more than, the architecture, which obviously, a lot of other stadiums have copied off Camden Yards in terms of trying to build around historic buildings like the Warehouse and trying to have, lots of exposed steel and brick, and that's all lovely. But in terms of, setting the standard for all the stadiums that come, really what the Orioles did was show, okay, here's the financing and revenue model that we can base it on, which is to socialize all the costs and privatize all the profits. And that's what every single, baseball stadium has been built on since then.
He is Neil DeMoss. He writes books and things out on Twitter. It's Field of Schemes is the way to find him out on Twitter. That's a great name. When you Google Field of Schemes, you see all of the other books. Public dollars, private stadiums. They play, you pay. This is a pretty familiar thing. And certainly for Baltimore to be involved in this. One thing on the outside, though, I follow all of this. So I'm at the league meetings in the NFL when they're moving teams from St. Louis out to Inglewood. And, obviously, Kroenke building that thing, and the NFL having its Taj Mahal out in L.A., 2 miles from LAX, and they're going to have combines and all that stuff. I get that, and the U2 concerts, and I get the NBA, and I get the Atlanta Hawks and Detroit and all the stuff going on. One thing I really don't understand, and I want you to explain it to me because I see more of this. I just drove up to Philly to see you two the other day, and I passed the soccer stadium in Chester, and I see on your Twitter Cincinnati's going to build a soccer stadium. I was out in Denver about a month and a half ago, and they have this soccer palace out there, and the DC United have pined away for 20 years. How in the world are these soccer facilities getting built? I mean, and where's that money? I don't know anything about it, but it really does make me scratch my head when I see these beautiful soccer facilities, and I'm wondering, how the hell does that pay for itself?
It's getting built because they're finding cities like Chester, right? There's a reason why that wasn't built in Philadelphia. You walk into Philadelphia and say, hey, give us a whole bunch of money and we'll get you a soccer team. And the people in Philadelphia, right, the elected officials in Philadelphia say, we have plenty of teams in sports.
Yeah, we gave that to the Eagles, right? We gave that to the Phillies, we gave that to the Sixers and the Flyers.
Yeah, and I like soccer. Don't get me wrong. Soccer is actually one of my favorite sports. But, I realize that it's not as popular probably as hockey, which is not a good thing to say, right? So it's got a ways to go before.
I like them both, so I'm that guy. But
it's sure. But I'm just saying, for both those sports, it's got a ways to go before they have the cachet of baseball and football, and that's why you don't see $500 million spent on a soccer stadium, because there's no way you would get that. You walk into the state legislature and say, we need $500 million for a soccer stadium, and they're like, soccer? Isn't that something that's played in other countries? But you go into a place like Chester or like Bridgeview, Illinois, right? Or a place like Cincinnati, or some of the smaller cities that are now being considered for MLS. And they start getting more excited about, wow, we can get another team here because we don't, Cincinnati just has baseball and football, right? So in terms of Major League sports, so that really is the model that MLS is trying to use. Is let's just go around to every city we possibly can come up with, say, build us a stadium and we'll give you a team, right? We don't, if we have to have another 10, 12, 20 expansion teams, that's okay. We'll get $150 million a pop from the new owner for the expansion franchise, and we will, hopefully get some money for a new stadium out of it too. And is this sustainable in the long run? Who knows, right? But that's not the way they're thinking. They're just thinking, well, this is a way of getting the money to come in, and certainly MLS isn't making money any other way, because they're, getting fans out there. I know from experience, in part by discounting tickets really deeply, right? I haven't paid full price for an MLS game in years because there's always some kind of offer out there. So I think that they're trying to make their money instead by just trying to sell new franchises.
He is Neil deMause. He is Field of Schemes on Twitter. The book is Field of Schemes, now almost a decade old. And boy, you could probably write 5 more books on the backside of this. One thing for you, I had a MLB writer on a couple months ago, and he had gone to Atlanta right at the beginning. And the first thing he said to me is, you better watch out in Baltimore. Camden Yards is 25 years old. Yeah. And when it comes time to build the next stadium, they probably won't want to build it downtown because, let's be honest, look inside the stadium, look outside the stadium, look at the riots that happened here 2 years ago, and that if Camden Yards were to be displaced at some point, it may be in Cockeysville or White Marsh or Hunt Valley or something crazy like that, Bel Air, that would look like what Atlanta has done, which is, to your point, built its own little city out at the edge of the city, at the edge of the freeway. And Neil, I got to be honest, man, all during my childhood, in the 70s and early 80s, before the Colts left here, before the Orioles got downtown, everything about the Orioles franchise was one day there'll be a stadium in Columbia, Maryland. So because it'll be halfway, or it'll be in Catonsville, on the edge of Baltimore, on the southwest corner, because of all the people in D.C. That certainly would have helped keep the Washington Nationals out of D.C., although Mr. Angelos has been very, very happy to have a crappy baseball team and drink from that trough of massive money over the last decade to the tune of $400 million they're fighting about now in the Supreme Court. But the Redskins tried to move into Laurel, and they tried to move into the corridor and into Bowie to keep the future Ravens out of Baltimore. But, for the Orioles, maybe one day they'll play in the suburbs. Maybe that's what baseball is. Or maybe baseball's just going to die a slow death because people aren't going to baseball games anymore, Neil.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not so sure I would worry too much about the Orioles moving out of Baltimore to the suburbs, just because baseball and football are so different in terms of the number of games and when they're held, right? So I think baseball has figured out that if you're going to be having a lot of games on, Tuesday and Wednesday nights, right, you need to be centrally located so that people who live in the suburbs on one side don't have to, leave the city, their job in the city, drive all the way to the suburbs on one side of town, then drive all the way back to the other side of town to get home. And it's just difficult. If you can do that for a football game, it's harder to do it for baseball. What I would be more concerned about, to be honest, is, and I think the Orioles are certainly sniffing around about how to upgrade Camden Yards. I would be concerned about being asked to put in a whole bunch of money for some kind of major renovation of the seating bowl, right? To incorporate a whole bunch of new things, and maybe to create some kind of Orioles-controlled entertainment district around there, right? They already have Utah Street, right? We're pioneers.
Well, that's everything. The entertainment, that's the whole Atlanta deal, right? I mean, that's the whole Foxborough deal, right?
Sure, and so I would be concerned that, they would want to try to control some of that land around there and expand out. I don't know which way you would go, I guess west, to try to, create some kind of little enclave, right, that would, if there are people concerned about going down to downtown Baltimore, would make them feel safe, because, okay, we're in Oriole Town, right? We're not really in Baltimore. We're in, in the ballpark village. And then also, obviously, allow them to control all the revenue from that, right? Because that's what the Braves have. The Braves, moved to a completely ridiculous location, to be honest with you, that's impossible to get to.
They didn't even have roads to get in there, right?
Atlanta is impossible to get around via the highways as it is.
And there's no MARTA going there, right?
Yeah, and there's no public transit. So you got to drive. You got to fight through the clogged roads. Everybody who's been there says that it's impossible to get there now. And this is with nobody going to games, because the Braves are terrible.
Hey, bro, you're
right?
talking to a guy that did FedEx Field on Tuesday night for the one time in the decade that I do it, and I can assure you, it still sucks.
Yeah,
I mean, it's horrific.
But what they do have is they have control of that land, not just the stadium, but the area around it, to build up whatever they want in terms of restaurants and offices, and try and build their own little city. And this is the model going back a ways now, is to sort of try and create these entertainment districts, where it's like a little enclosed enclave somewhere in downtown, in a good place, centrally located to get to, but sort of walled off from the rest of the city. And that would be my concern. Again, I don't know if the Orioles have started thinking those in those terms, but that would be my worry, that would be the next sort of step that they could take, because I don't think it benefits them. Camden Yards is, to be honest with you, probably more of a draw than the Orioles have been. I mean, the Orioles have had some success, right? But Camden Yards still has some cachet.
I'm very familiar with that. I live downtown. People walk around and they go to the games without an Orioles shirt. They're just in town. They're a firefighter here in a convention, and they want to see the ballpark.
Yep. Nobody goes to Cincinnati Red Stadium because they want to see the ballpark, but people still do that with Camden Yards. So I don't think that they would give that up that quickly. But again, there's a way for the Orioles to keep that benefit and also try to seek more, and that would be some kind of renovation and expansion of the area that they control. Look at what the Cubs are doing with Wrigley Field, right, where they're really expanding themselves out into the neighborhood with a lot of city help. And that would be the sort of thing to watch out for, because that, again, isn't necessarily beneficial to the city or to the people certainly who live in that area, but it would be hugely beneficial to the Orioles.
I can't imagine what Wrigley Field's going to be like once they get the parking done. They've had a team there for 100 years, and you couldn't even park a horse in a buggy 100 years ago, I bet. Neil, it's always great to catch up with you, man. I don't have you on often, but I love nerding out on Stadium Talk, and I will bug you and darken your doorstep a little more often. Tell everybody what you do out there, because you're up in Brooklyn, and I see you tweeting out. You're one of the foremost guys on all of the stadium stuff, and it's really fact-checking all the chicanery that goes on amongst politicians and municipalities, right?
Yeah, I mean, I do a bunch of different things. I mean, I'm not going to publish another 5 books because, to be honest with you, books are, as you probably know, books are a lot of work.
Yes.
And really the basics of the stadium game haven't changed since we did the last edition of Fieldless Games in 2008. So that's why I have the Fieldless Games website, and the Twitter and the Facebook, to sort of keep up with things. So every morning I'm up, reporting on the latest news from the stadium and arena world. And then, I also write about sports and other things for Village Voice, Vice Sports, a whole bunch of different outlets to sort of try and get the word out about some of these things and be able to explore some of these other issues because it's been interesting to see. There's more sort of sports business journalism going on. I think more people focusing on this, and that's great. But not necessarily. A lot of it is from the sort of business industry perspective, right? About how much is the team worth. Whereas it's a little slower to have people really focusing on it from sort of a sports economics perspective of how can we as consumers understand, our role and how, it works in terms of how ticket prices are set and, why do teams spend so much money on ball players and, is this money coming out of our pockets? There's so many interesting topics to focus on. So, I like to dabble in some of that as well in terms, and not just in the way that we're getting ripped off for stadiums, but in the way we're getting ripped off for other things as well.
Well, you're up in New York, and just the Islanders Barclays Center thing is huge. The Citi Field thing, where they built that ballpark in the middle of like a truck stop. It's insane on top of the old stadium, and they've tried to do the Village there, and they're not going to let them do it, right? So there's a lot of things going on, even just where you live, where there's push and pull, and there's obviously always push and pull going on here with Angelos and IRL races and concerts and Van Halen lawsuits, and there's just always stuff going on because these stadia, and here in in Baltimore, the World Cup bid that the U.S. had, Olympics bids, trying to get these Premier League teams to come over and play friendlies in the summer to fill a stadium up. So that it's kind of always going on, right? As long as these stadiums or stadia are here and the arenas are here, they're always looking for how to put fannies in seats and how to make more money on it, right?
And as long as there's the opportunity to try to get public money, I think one of the reasons you're seeing so many stadiums built over the last 25 years isn't because, suddenly they realized, we suddenly have new ways of building stadiums and this is going to be more of a draw. It's because they realize we have new ways of trying to make money off these things by, having somebody else pay for them. In New York, I've now been working on this long enough to have gone from New York being the place that didn't have any new stadiums to the place that had all the new stadiums, right? Yankees, Mets, Barclays Center.
The Garden always feels new. Every time I go in the Garden, I tell people, man, the Garden's an experience unto itself now. Like it used to be an old dump like the way Yankee Stadium was. Boy, the Garden's beautiful. You go to the Garden and see Billy Joel, it's a special night to me,
But now I thought, New York is done, right? New York's got all the new stadiums. They're not going to build anything new. And now, like you said, they're talking about a new stadium for the Islanders somewhere, whether it's Queens or Long Island. As long as there's somebody out there who thinks, the best, one of the best quotes on this is still from close to 20 years ago, whenever it was that the Orlando Magic were starting to try and get a new arena to replace the one that was built in the 80s, right? And so it was like, the old arena was like 12, 13 years old, something like that.
I can't imagine the DeVos family going out looking for public money. That would be shocking to me, Neil. Shocking.
And I asked Rod Ford, who's a sports economist at the University of Michigan now, I said, honestly, what do you think the shelf life of a new stadium is now, right? Because it used to say like 40 years or 30 years. What's the shelf life now before it's considered, time to be replaced? And he said, if I'm a sports team owner, I don't see anything wrong with getting a new stadium every year, as long as I'm not the one paying for it. And I think that's still true. The reason why teams are still looking around and saying, we want a new stadium, we want a renovated stadium, isn't because the old places are falling down or obsolete or anything like that. It's because they think, hey, everybody else is getting a new one. I bet we can get one too.
Well, this is the Mark Davis thing, right? Like, I would watch him after his father died, because I've been going to these owners' meetings for well over a decade at this point. And, old man Davis came in and out. out, and he's the bandit owner, and, obviously recognizable. And then his kid goes into these meetings, and now, over the course of the kid's lifetime, he's walked in and seen franchises move all over the place for new stadia, guys doing whatever they want to do. Everyone in the room, even Lambeau Field, wound up getting a palace of their own to call home, and he's playing where they got flies in the bathroom out in Oakland, and now, it came his turn to cash in, and he's going to cash in. He screwed Sheldon Adelson over, and he's going to live to tell. It's incredible, right?
That was impressive, I do not know how Mark Davis pulled that off, I think he's probably smarter than we give him credit for.
He's got Davis blood, man.
yeah. Haircut or no, he's got the ability to find a way to, to get what he wants and sort of snooker people. And he came out of that, with the whole $750 million pretty much for himself, right? So, it's fun. Fun is probably not the right word, There's a lot of laughing to keep from crying in my business. Right?
Oh, there's no justifying any of it. It's
where it's all horrific, but you have to be at least amused by it, because it is such a blatant swindle, and it is such a an unjustifiable cash grab, It's not about like, oh, well, here's something.
It's an emotional buy. It's like buying something that says Louis Vuitton on it. You just, you just want it, and you have to have it. And, I guess to both of our points, all these owners get together, and they're all trying to be Jerry Jones. They're all trying to get the biggest, newest, biggest screen, best stadium, most seats, most public revenue, most skybox revenue. Let's put a pool on the roof in Jacksonville, and I don't. People are paying for it, U2's getting $1,000 to sit in the little heart up in front. Better they get it than the ticket scalpers, I guess, right?
Yeah, and and the more you read about these owners, right? When you actually do hear reports about what actually goes on in owners' meetings or anything like that, right? They're just a bunch of guys. You have to remember, they're just a bunch of guys who happen to have a whole lot of money. And they act like any other bunch of guys in a room where they're like, hey, that guy's got a new scoreboard. How come I don't have a new scoreboard, And they make decisions for dumb reasons, and they, have weird factions and things like that, and half the time a team getting approval to move or not move.
Well,
or whatever.
dude, let's just on the face of this. Why are there two NFL teams in LA? There should be no reason in the world that they should want two teams there when they don't even really want one team there, right? Like, and this has now happened in the last 3 years, right? And Vegas, a place that has never really wanted football or needed football, now they have a team as well.
There are two teams. There are two teams in LA because for decades, LA was the threat, right? LA was the place, that you held up and said, to your local city, if you don't give us a new stadium, we're going to go to LA, right? Nobody actually pulled the trigger and did it. Then finally, after a bunch of teams you had the Raiders, the Rams, and the Chargers all, doing that same thing of like, oh, LA's out there, we're going to. Finally, Stan Kroenke with the Rams pulled the trigger and said, okay, I'm going to go and build this. Suddenly, Davis and what's his name, Spanos, right, in San Diego, were like, oh crap, there's going to go our leverage if the Rams move to L.A. and we don't move to L.A. We're going to have to announce moving to L.A. too, right? So you had this competition to see who could get to move to L.A. Rams won it. Rams moved in there. The Chargers didn't want to be, the second team in Southern California. Figured, okay, fine, we'll move up there too because we're not going to be getting a stadium out of San Diego now. It looks like. And then the Raiders were like, well, wait, how do we get a stadium out of Oakland now without threatening to go somewhere? Let's see where we can shop around to. And they looked at Vegas. They looked at San Antonio. They were looking wherever, probably.
Jerry didn't like them in San Antonio. Jerry was never going to let them go to San Antonio.
Doesn't matter. You just got to figure out who's the best threat, right, that you can use to. And Las Vegas bit, Nevada said, okay, fine, here's $750 million with Adelson's help, So then at that point, sure, you take it. I mean, the way the NFL financing, the economic system works, it really doesn't matter where you play, right? You can play in New York, you can play in L.A., you can play in, Burkina Faso or on the surface of the moon, and you are still going to get those same checks from the TV networks. So it really doesn't matter that much market size in terms of the individual owner for an NFL team, the way it does for a baseball team or a basketball or hockey, something like that. So, from Davis's perspective, he can sell out, three-quarters of the seats in Las Vegas just as well as he can in Oakland. Whether it makes any sense for the NFL, who knows? But I think, they were like, well, somebody's offering a $750 million check. We're not going to turn that down.
Well, and off to Vegas they go. Neil, we'll continue to stay in touch. We'll follow you out at Field of Schemes. I loved your word swindle, by the way. That's going to be my word of the week, swindle. Hey, man, take care of yourself. Always a pleasure, bro.
You too. Happy to be here.
You got it. Neil DeMoss, who I actually quoted as well in the Peter Principles from some of his previous work out at Field of Schemes as well. You can check him out on Twitter. You can find me in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. We do come in crystal clear anywhere in the world, including up in Brooklyn where Neil is. The morning newspaper ships to your email inbox at 7 a.m. digitally each and every morning. That's all brought to you by Planet Fitness, where they saved my life in Landover, Maryland, and Raul John on Tuesday night. So thank you, Planet Fitness, for getting me parked and comfortable and in bed by midnight, which I do appreciate as well. Last but never least, any breaking news happens first on our WNST Tech Service. That's all brought to you by our friends at Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And that's Dennis Colossus. He'll be here on Thursday from 3 until 5, driving you home and getting you ready for the weekend with the SSV on WNST. Peter Principles are out. Chapter 6 now online with more to come. One chapter a week, every week, all summer long. It's the summer of Peter G. Angelos. I'm sure you're going to love it. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.